Most people never stop speaking to God. They simply stop realizing what they are revealing about themselves every time they pray. The words sound faithful. They sound humble. No one questions them. Churches repeat them. Families pass them down. They become part of a believer's vocabulary until one day those same words begin shaping a spiritual identity God never asked anyone to carry. The strange part is this: heaven may not be resisting your prayer. Your own understanding of God may be. Few people notice that the greatest deception rarely begins with rebellion. It usually begins with language that feels completely harmless. There are sentences many sincere Christians have spoken thousands of times without ever examining what those words quietly confess. Not because they reject God, but because pain has a way of rewriting theology before we notice it. Scripture repeatedly shows that people reveal their hearts long before they reveal their actions. A mouth does not create belief. It exposes it. This changes the meaning completely. The issue is not learning 6 forbidden phrases as if God were listening for the wrong combination of words. The deeper issue is discovering the hidden beliefs those phrases carry. Once those beliefs remain untouched, the same fear simply finds different words. Today, we are not examining vocabulary. We are examining what the vocabulary has been hiding. Part 1. When humility quietly becomes unbelief. The first sentence sounds so innocent that almost nobody questions it. Lord, I am not worthy. It has been repeated in quiet bedrooms, hospital rooms, church pews, funeral services. It feels respectful. It feels small. It feels like the safest way to approach a holy God. But this is where the illusion breaks. There is a difference between remembering who you were and refusing who Christ says you have become. Many believers never notice when humility slowly turns into a permanent identity. They continue approaching God as though the cross merely reduced their guilt instead of changing their position before Him. They still expect distance. They still expect hesitation. They still expect heaven to remain slightly closed. Few people recognize how often shame disguises itself as reverence. Shame always sounds spiritual because it constantly lowers itself. Yet its attention never actually rests on Christ. It remains fixed on the self. The cross becomes secondary. Personal failure remains the center of every conversation. Romans reminds us that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Not after improvement, not after discipline, not after proving consistency. Before any of those things existed, the deeper contradiction is uncomfortable. Every time a believer insists that Christ's sacrifice was enough for everyone except themselves, they unknowingly place more confidence in their own failures than in His finished work. They call it humility. But heaven does not measure humility by how small you make yourself. It measures whether you believe what God has already declared about those who belong to His Son. That is why some prayers never feel close. Not because God stepped away, because the person praying never stopped standing outside a door that had already been opened. Part 2. The prayer that quietly puts God on trial. Not every accusation sounds angry. Some are spoken through exhausted whispers. Some arrive after months of unanswered prayers. Others hide behind tears that no one else ever sees. Lord, why won't you help me? It sounds honest. It sounds understandable. And sometimes it feels like the only sentence left inside a tired soul. But the deeper issue is rarely the question itself. It is the conclusion already hiding behind it. Long before those words leave your mouth, your heart has often reached a silent verdict. God must not be listening. God must have forgotten. God must care more about everyone else's story than yours. Few people notice that disappointment has a strange way of rewriting the character of God without ever touching the pages of Scripture. Pain begins interpreting His silence. Fear begins explaining His delays. Eventually, imagination becomes louder than truth. This is where the illusion breaks. God's silence has never automatically meant God's absence. Throughout Scripture, His greatest work often unfolded where His voice seemed almost impossible to hear. Joseph heard nothing inside the prison. David heard nothing while hiding in caves. Abraham waited through years that looked painfully empty. Heaven often appeared quiet precisely because something deeper was already moving beneath the surface. The human heart, however, struggles with what it cannot measure. We trust movement we can see. We trust answers we can hold. We trust timing that agrees with our own. But God repeatedly refuses to build faith on visible evidence alone. Hebrews declares that he will never leave nor forsake his people. Notice the certainty of those words. They leave no room for exceptions created by emotion. Yet emotion constantly argues otherwise. That contradiction lives inside almost every believer. We confess God's faithfulness on Sunday. We quietly question it on Monday. The strange part is that suffering rarely destroys faith immediately. It slowly teaches people to reinterpret God through disappointment instead of allowing God to reinterpret disappointment through his presence. Job eventually discovered something few people expect. God never gave him the detailed explanation he demanded. Instead, God revealed himself. And once Job saw who had been present all along, many of the questions that once felt impossible to live without quietly lost their power. Perhaps the greatest danger is not asking where God is. It is deciding where he is before he has finished revealing what he has been doing. Part 3. The faith that still tries to stay in control. There is another sentence that sounds devoted while quietly protecting the one thing it refuses to surrender. Lord, if you do this, then I will serve you. Few believers recognize how naturally the human heart turns obedience into a negotiation. It rarely sounds selfish. It sounds committed. If you heal my family, if you open this door, if you rescue my finances, then I will finally trust you. Then I will obey. Then I will give you everything. But notice what has already happened. Obedience has become a future transaction instead of a present decision. This changes the meaning completely. Genuine faith does not wait for favorable circumstances before it moves. Bargaining does. The strange part is that most people never call it bargaining because they wrap it in religious language. Yet beneath the polished words sits an uncomfortable assumption. God must first prove himself before I fully surrender. Scripture exposes this pattern long before it exposes open rebellion. Jacob once declared that if God protected him, provided for him, and brought him home safely, then the Lord would be his God. Even after witnessing an extraordinary revelation, he still attempted to place conditions around his commitment. God was not negotiating. He was inviting transformation. Jacob eventually received that transformation, but only after years of broken expectations, difficult losses, and painful encounters that slowly dismantled the illusion that God exists to advance human plans. The deeper contradiction is easy to miss. Many believers ask God to bless the life they have already designed instead of asking him to reshape the life they are trying to protect. They pray for divine approval while quietly resisting divine authority. This is where the illusion breaks. Control can wear the clothing of faith so convincingly that even sincere Christians mistake one for the other. The same pattern appears when people excuse repeated compromise by saying, God knows I'm weak. Of course he knows. He knew before the first failure. Grace was never given because weakness surprised him. But grace was also never intended to become a permanent hiding place where transformation is endlessly postponed. Romans asks a question that still unsettles comfortable believers today. Shall we continue in sin so that grace may increase? The answer is immediate. By no means. Grace does not merely forgive the old person. It confronts the old person. It refuses to leave that person unchanged. Perhaps the greatest deception is not pretending to be strong. It is becoming so comfortable with weakness that you quietly stop expecting God to make you different. Part 4. When you mistake your limits for God's. Some of the most dangerous words a believer can speak are not spoken in anger. They are spoken after disappointment has settled into certainty. This can't be God's will, or perhaps even quieter. I've done everything I can. Neither sentence sounds rebellious. In fact, both usually arrive after sincere effort, after prayer, after waiting, after exhaustion. That is why they are so difficult to recognize. They do not feel like unbelief. They feel like realism. But the deeper issue is this. Human reasoning has quietly taken the place where trust once lived. Few people notice how easily fear disguises itself as discernment. A difficult path immediately feels suspicious. A costly decision begins to look unspiritual. A delayed answer suddenly appears to be a closed door. Without realizing it, people slowly redefine God's will until it becomes almost identical to personal comfort. If obedience demands too much, if forgiveness feels impossible, if sacrifice seems unreasonable, the conclusion forms almost automatically. God wouldn't ask that of me. But Scripture tells a different story. Jonah did not misunderstand God's voice. He understood it perfectly. His problem was not confusion. It was resistance. He rejected the command because he rejected where it would lead. That changes everything. Sometimes the greatest obstacle to hearing God is not silence from heaven. It is the determination to keep listening until heaven says something easier. Then comes the final illusion. I've done everything I can, Lord. At first, it sounds like surrender. Yet surrender and resignation are not the same thing. One releases control while continuing to trust. The other quietly concludes that nothing more is possible. Martha stood before Jesus believing the opportunity had already expired. Lazarus had been dead for days. The timeline made sense. The conclusion seemed reasonable. Hope now belonged to the past. But Jesus never accepted the limits everyone else considered obvious. He did not argue with human logic. He simply stepped beyond it. The stone was moved. The grave answered his voice. What everyone had accepted as irreversible became the very place where God's authority was revealed. This is where the illusion finally breaks. Most people never stop believing that God is powerful. They simply begin believing that his power no longer applies to their situation. They continue speaking about miracles while privately assuming theirs has already missed its moment. That quiet contradiction rarely appears in public worship. It appears in private prayers, in the words chosen when no one else is listening. Because every prayer eventually reveals something deeper than desire. It reveals expectation. It reveals where trust quietly ends. And perhaps that has been the real subject all along. Not the 6 phrases themselves, but the hidden beliefs that have been speaking through them long before the words were ever heard.